We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara Mesechet Shekalim. This is Shekalim Daf 17b. The Gemara says, Chore Yehuda Cain, when the noblemen of Yehuda saw what was happening, that Yehoiachin was being taken into Golus by Nebuchadnezzar, Alu L'Rosh Gagosei, and they went up to the roofs of their houses, V'naflu v'mesu, and they fell off and they died. Hadahu d'chsiv, and that's what it means when it says in the pasuk in Yeshaya, Masu gechizayin malachefo, ki olis kulach legagos teshuos m'layir homeh v'gomer. It says, you all went up to the roofs. That's exactly what Yeshaya was talking about. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Yud Gimel Shulchanos Hayu B'Mikdash. There were 13 tables in the Beis HaMikdash. Ches Shel Sheish B'Beis HaMitbachayim. 8 of them were made out of marble. They were near the Mizbeach. This was the area where they slaughtered the animals, Shalei and Madicha and Sakirbayim. It was on these tables that they rinsed off the innards of the animals. Ubeis b'mayrev hakevesh. There were also 2 tables on the west side of the ramp. Echad shel sheish v'echad shel kesef. One was made out of marble, one was made out of silver. Al shel sheish nosnenes ha'yivorim. On the one that was made out of marble, they put the limbs. The idea over here is they always use the marble for things which they couldn't put, let's say, the parts of the animal which would spoil if it was put on the silver tables. So they didn't use silver tables for that purpose. They used marble tables for that purpose. V'al shel kesef klei sharis. On the silver table, that's where they put the klei sharis. That's where they put the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Mishnah continues, Ubeis bu'ulam mi befnim. There were also 2 tables in the ulam on the inside, al pesach habayis, meaning right by the entrance to the heichal, the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash. The ulam was the area right in front of the heichal, so there were 2 tables over there as well. Echad shel sheish v'echad shel zav. One was made out of marble, and one was made out of gold. Al shel sheish nosnim lechem aponim b'chnisoso. On the marble one, that's where they would put the lechem aponim that was going to be entering the Beis HaMikdash and sitting on the shulchan in the Beis HaMikdash for the coming week. So it started off sitting on the marble table, waiting for its turn to go into the Beis HaMikdash to sit on the shulchan hazav that was in the Beis HaMikdash, v'al shel zav, and then on the golden table which was in the ulam, b'yitziaso, that's where the lechem aponim would sit after the week was over, when it was finished and a new lechem aponim was coming into the Beis HaMikdash. So the old lechem aponim was taken off the table that's in the Beis HaMikdash, and it was brought onto this golden table outside the Beis HaMikdash in preparation for now the Kohanim are going to be eating from the lechem aponim. And the Mishnah explains, Shemalin bakodesh v'lo moridin. The reason why it had to be a golden table on the way out was because we always have to go up in holiness and not down. And echad shel zav mi befnim, the one that was in the inside where the real lechem aponim was, meaning the weekly lechem aponim, that was made out of gold. She'ol of lechem aponim tamid. That's where the lechem aponim always was. In other words, once the lechem aponim would sit on the table in the heichel, which was a golden table, it was shel zav. So now, when it leaves the Beis HaMikdash, when it leaves the heichel and goes to the ulam, to the next table, ready for the kohanim to eat from it, so it has to be a golden table as well, because you can only go up in kedusha and not down. The reason why it started off on a table made out of sheish is simply because, again, we don't want the bread to get moldy, so that's why it starts off on a table of marble. But once it goes into the heichel, onto the shulchan hazav, so then it continues to be placed on shulchanos made out of zav. And the Gemara says, Tani al shel kesef. There's a brisa that disagrees with our Mishnah and says that the lechem aponim, it wouldn't start off on a marble table, it would start off on a silver table. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Rabbi Chananya moti ba b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Either Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, or Rav Chananya says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, les kan shel kesef. They did not use a table of silver. That brisa is incorrect, mimnei shu marsiach, because again, it causes the bread to get moldy. That's why it would start off on a table of marble. And the Gemara says, Lo chein tani, but 1 second. Didn't we learn in a brisa, Ze'echad min hanisim shena'asu bebeis hamikdash, that when it came to the lechem aponim, this was one of the miracles that happened in the Beis Hamikdash. Shekashem shayomanichen osochom, kachayim motziin osochom, just like they would bring it into the Beis Hamikdash and the bread was warm, so too when it would leave the Beis Hamikdash, it was still warm. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, lasum lachem chom biyom hilakho. Even on the day it was taken, it was warm. So the question of the Gemara is, if there were already miracles happening with the lechem aponim, like it stayed warm, so why not just put it on a silver table, and there'll be a miracle that it's not going to become moldy? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Omar, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Ein mazkirin ma'aseh nisim. We can't mention miracles, meaning we cannot rely on miracles. So it's true, it stayed warm, that was a miracle. But that doesn't mean we should put it onto a silver table and just rely on a miracle, that's not going to cause the bread to become moldy. The Gemara continues, Ba'on kumi Rabbi Eila. They asked the following question in front of Rabbi Eila. Lo haya sham lechem. Let's say they didn't have lechem aponim coming in for the next week. So ma'u lahanicho l'Shabbos haba? Can they leave the same lechem aponim on the table for 2 weeks? Leave it for an extra week. Leave it an extra week, so it's there 2 weeks, and that way the table will never be empty. So Amar lo, and so he said to them, Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, V'nasata la shulchan lechem ponim lefonai tamid. It says you should always have a lechem aponim on the table, and the idea is that lechem ponim afilu pasel. Now the Gra over here changes the girsa, and the Gra's girsa is hachi garsinan va'afilu hu kama yomim. The girsa should be the lechem aponim is kosher even if it's there for extra days, for many days, meaning there's no psul lina when it comes to the lechem aponim. If you need to leave it extra time because you don't have a lechem aponim for this particular week, so you need to leave the other one, that's perfectly fine. And the Gemara continues, Asara shulchanus asa Shlomo. Shlomo HaMelech, when he built the Beis HaMikdash, he had 10 shulchanos. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, Vayas shulchanos asara, vayonach behechol. He made 10 shulchanos, chamisha miyamin v'chamisha mismol. He had 5 on the right side and 5 on the left side. And the question is, what does it mean, the right side and the left side? And the Gemara says, in Tamar chamisha b'darim v'hei b'tzafan, if you're going to say that there were 5 in the south and 5 in the north, in other words, the right and left refers to the southern part of the Heichel and the right and the northern part of the Heichel, v'alo eina shulchan kasher ela b'tzafan, that can't be, because the halach is the shulchan can only be placed in the northern part of the Heichel. Shenamar, like the pasuk says, v'esa shulchan titin al tzelat tzafan, you put the shulchan on the northern side. So Matamad Lomar, so therefore what does the pasuk mean when it says chamisha miyamin v'chamisha mismol? It says you have to have 5 on the right and 5 on the left. Elo chamisha miyamin shulchanu shel Moshe v'chamisha mismolo. It means very simply, you had the original shulchan of Moshe Rabbeinu. On its right side there were 5 other tables, and on its left side there were 5 more tables. And the Gemara says, Afa pichei, nevertheless, lo yamesader ela b'shel Moshe bilvad. The lechem aponim was only arranged on the shulchan of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was not arranged on these other shulchanos. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, as shulchan asher olav lechem aponim. That was the shulchan which upon it was the lechem aponim. Gemara has a different opinion. Rabbi Yossi Bey Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi Bey Rabbi Yehuda says, Al kulon hayemesader. They would put the lechem aponim on all of the tables in the times of Shlomo HaMelech. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, as shulchanos ve'aleim lechem aponim. And the shulchanos in plural, that's where they placed the lechem aponim. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Tani, it was taught, Mizrach u'mayriv hayenesunim divrei Rebbe. According to Rebbe, these shulchanos were placed from east to west, meaning their length was according to the length of the Heichel. It was one table right next to the other, lengthwise through the Heichel. Rabbi Lazar Bey Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Lazar says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Safon v'darim hayinesunim. They were actually placed from north to south, meaning their length ran the width of the Heichel. So the Gemara says, Man davar mizrach u'mayrav nicha. According to what who says they ran from east to west, that's very good, because kulon ru'i and l'sheiris, because now that's all good, because they're all in the northern part of the Heichel. They're all fit to serve, meaning if their length is running from east to west along the length of the Heichel, none of the tables are in the southern part of the Heichel. They're all in the northern part of the Heichel. However, man damar tzafan v'darim, but the one who says that these tables ran from north to south, nimsa shulchan b'darim, doesn't it come out that the shulchan is in the southern part of the Heichel, which is not allowed? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph.